No, no, I'm using my work account. They're nice
Oh,
enough to let me have it. It's a bigger screen. So,
oh, nice.
yes,
Okay. I'm just adjusting my audio. Can you hear me okay?
I can, sure.
Okay, great. Are we ready to start? So if it's okay with you, Evan, we're going to post this and put it out there on social media, if you're
That's
all right
fine.
with that. Okay, great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Spreading the word is why I'm here. So,
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you so much. Now, you reached out to me a little bit ago, and we've been in touch back and forth a little bit. And you sent me a letter that you had been involved with remotely, I believe, that was sent to the superintendent of schools for Lyme old Lyme.
that's correct. Well, so the letter initiated with it's the coalition, the Connecticut Coalition for Educational Justice and an Inclusive Curriculum. And so that's a group that is, I mean, the name says it all. What we're trying to do, we have I think about 900 members at this point. And it's just people who run the gamut from educators, teachers, school board members, parents, or just concerned citizens and taxpayers who want to see meaningful structural changes to the curriculum so that anti-racism and a large diversity of voices can be included. At the moment, as with many curricula, it's very narrowly focused. It covers a lot of, the standard things, but it tends to be pretty Eurocentric. Not a lot of information about anywhere except, the Anglo-European, frame. And frankly, there are a lot of kids sitting in classes who don't feel like they're being, racially or culturally addressed. And we want to change that. We feel like that that the one of the goals of education is to prepare people to be thoughtful citizens who are respectful of other people in the community, and that's what we're aiming for with with trying to get these changes to the curriculum.
Okay, well, thank you for reaching out to me because you actually initiated,
I
and then
did, yes.
yeah, and then I just responded. If we could back up a little bit, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Are you an educator?
I am not. So I have been involved in education in various ways. I'm not a certified teacher or anything. I've been a museum educator. I was at the Seaport, so and I also done tutoring. So I mean, I have been involved in the education space to an extent. More so, though, what I've been involved with is I used to be the executive director of a program called Unite for Students, which was addressing the school to prison pipeline, as it's called, out in California. And so we were working on issues around the fact that a lot of kids, especially kids of color and from lower economic status backgrounds, were being diverted essentially into the penal system before they had a chance to be diverted into with more productive or fulfilling lives. It just a lot of schools in some neighborhoods were essentially just holding pens before before the penal system got them. So we were trying to cut that off at the root.
Well,
Uh,
I like that. I like that a lot. So when you talk about the seaport, you mean Mystic Seaport, so that
correct. Yeah.
you were working, what did you do? What was the capacity there?
Well, in several capacities. So I was in the interpretation department. So I would do everything from I was an actor in Moby Dick in Minutes, where we did the entirety of Moby Dick using the original language, but in under half an hour. I worked in the Children's Museum there, and then I worked in certain exhibits. So using object-based learning to inform people about what life was like in the maritime New England coastal scene and beyond in the 17 and 1800s. So
Well, beautiful. That's really nice work. And I was part of the interpretation department a few years ago and did that for probably just about a year and a half or so.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and really enjoyed it. And my takeaway from that whole experience was that the people on the ships, on the Barts, Bar, is it Bart? Barge?
The Barks.
Barts, that was
Yeah.
it. Okay. They were just like a little microcosm of a community in and of themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
And they had to get along, and it didn't matter, you know, they had to depend on each other for their life and taking, you know, watching their back, making sure like if that person was safe, then you would be safe. And that whole community, I think that's just such a great example of,
Absolutely. It was
yeah,
actually, I mean, as you know, it was, you know, life aboard, you know, whaling ships and other vessels that were transoceanic were some of the most multicultural places on the planet at that point.
every time they stopped, they'd pick up another culture, maybe another language, maybe,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Well,
another,
people would jump off too, so they'd have to pick up people from, you know, wherever they were. So it
yeah,
was
win some, lose some, right?
right, exactly. It was not a happy or easy life, but at the time, it did also provide some of the best economic opportunities for people who were, you know, in a position generally because of race and ethnicity, who couldn't otherwise find that kind of steady and potentially lucrative work. So
Right, right. And the Joseph Conrad, was that the other one where it was the ship where people learn to have sailing skills at
right,
an
yeah.
early age? And I really like that whole philosophy and psychology that went behind that.
Oh
And
yeah, it was yeah. People, I mean, you know, the best part of the job for me was honestly, um, you know, people who might just be on vacation and they're like, okay, let's just go and do this thing, and then all of a sudden they learn something that completely changes their mindset and attitude about, you know, what life was like back then, and you know, how things have developed, how things were stunningly similar and radically different at sometimes, you know, at the same moment. So
exactly, simultaneously.
yeah.
So, um, and I found a quote that's from the National Museum of African American Culture, History and Culture,
Mhm.
that's in at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And it says the classroom is a place where students practice the skills of being a responsible and engaged member of society. And I think that really speaks to your whole mission, if that's not too strong of a word to describe what you're all about and what you're trying to advocate for, what you are advocating for and reaching out and accomplishing in the work that you're doing. So
Yes, absolutely.
I applaud you for that. And inclusion, tell me a little bit about that, because that's something that's, go ahead. I can,
Yes, yeah. So I actually made a mistake because it is a long thing. It is the Connecticut Coalition for Educational Justice and a Culturally Responsive Curriculum. Though, of course, um, cultural responsivity involves inclusivity. So I made a small boo-boo there, but
no problem. And I just wanted to find out about that. Okay.
sure.
Okay.
And so that's really what we're discussing is we're not necessarily trying to tear down anything except structures of racism and racial bias. You know, I mean, we're not looking to, um, you know, I mean, there are certain things that are always going to be learned about, right? I mean, it's not necessarily that, you know, there that well, the way I approach it is that history and literature are a conversation, and you know, when you part of what the responsibility of educating students is to educate them in ways that they can think for themselves and become lifelong learners. So, you know, I mean, it's not a matter of, we actually have too much indoctrination as it stands. So it's not a matter of trying to tell kids how to feel about things or how to think. It's trying to reflect the reality of life and society. It be reflective of, again, people who are in our schools, in our communities, and don't find a place right now in, you know, the humanities and arts curricula. So it's, you know, we're trying to expand what kids are exposed to, because, you know, if you're in a diverse community, you're already exposed to people, you know, from different backgrounds, you know, and then it's strange to then sit in a class and not have any of that reflected. I mean, for instance, I went to Lime Old Lime High School, which was, I mean, is lily white. We, you know, uh, we, we had a Jewish kid, and that was our ethnic minority. Like that was, it was that, you know, homogenous. And we didn't really learn anything other than, you know, through the frame of a, you know, white, you know, the traditional boilerplate story of history in America. And frankly, I think that, I mean, I'm a history buff. You know, I like names and dates. But if you're learning about the Bourbon dynasty in its entirety, and you're learning virtually nothing about the cultures and history of sub-Saharan Africa or East Asia, not only is that going to be a problem for kids who are sitting there going about, well, what about my heritage? But it's a problem for people who don't even, you know, share that heritage, because it's just narrowing the world for them when education should be expanding the world.
I agree. I totally agree. So I understand your vantage point and your desire to expand the whole opportunity for all of our students, for all of us. And there's just so much to talk about when it comes to all of this. And the first thing that I refer to when I go to the National Museum of African American History and Culture is some of the trainings that go on there. And some of them are just as simple as bias training and the implicit bias, and then how we all look at ourselves and how we look at everybody based on our first experience with somebody who looked differently than how we look, and how that impacted us. And was it a positive or a negative? And I talk about, as a kid growing up in Omaha, Nebraska, the veterinarian that we had for the family dog was a Black man, person of color, and a brilliant man, and very gentle and good with animals, and always made my dog Sandy feel better. So he was kind of a hero in my mind. And then down the road, Ernie Chambers was a state senator that I was always so proud of. And he was a Black man who was just very, he just brought, he was a barbershop owner by day, but then brought so much awareness to so many people, and just really had his thumb on the pulse of what was going on in the community. So could really speak to what was really important for so many people. So I really gained a great deal of respect, and from those two very different perspectives. But
Yeah.
you know, so it's just things like that. And then how do we help to expand that for other people, I guess? What are some of the steps that you're suggesting?
Well, I mean, again, the focus on the curriculum, but you're right. I mean, there is, it's undeniable that there is a lot of implicit and explicit bias and racism that permeates, and some of it is not visible, right? I mean, as we say in the letter that's been, the draft letter that's been going around, the letter that was submitted to the Lime Old Lime school system, it's not a matter of, you know, white people are all vicious racists, you know, it's just that we have the privilege of not having to confront racism all the time. We can choose to turn it off. We can go somewhere else. We can change the channel. We don't, you know, we can, you know, even when we have, when we're friends with people of color, we don't have to inhabit that experience, but they always do. They are made to be aware of, you know, the racist undercurrents that permeate everything. And so looking at the curriculum through that lens is the first step, is an assessment of where can we do better? Are there areas where we're perpetuating the sorts of stereotypes or the sorts of you know, negative impressions that have been created over centuries and are still prevalent in the culture today? And then there are, you know, easier steps. Well, easier, you know, should be easier steps, but, you know, take a look at where, you know, people of color, Black writers, Black artists, Asian, indigenous, you know, where can the wall of white give way to some color? And it tends to be just a wall of whiteness. And from that perspective, even authors who are talking about race are usually talking about race from the perspective of a white person talking about race, which isn't necessarily something that's nefarious. I mean, like Cry the Beloved Country is a great book, by, Alan Paton, who was horrified by apartheid South Africa. But it's a white man, again, talking about his experiences lived secondhand. We should be talking about how we can have firsthand voices incorporated into that. And there's so much out there. There's so many opportunities to do so. We just need to be conscious about it. And so those are steps. Another thing, though, too, is that to address biases that are so prevalent, we have to be explicit about being anti-racist, and we have to,
I don't think, and I had a friend tell me recently that we have to have uncomfortable conversations, and we have to make ourselves vulnerable, and we have to say, I'm sorry, I don't know this, or, open ourselves up to saying, wow, I didn't realize that. And, forgive me if I offended you because that was not my intention, but we make mistakes, and truly we don't mean to a lot of the time, but it's just, it's 300 years of that being part of our history and our culture that we need to start being more aware of it.
300 to 500 years, because there's a whole, I mean, I don't mean to cut you off, but there's a whole history, that the number that's usually thrown out there is 400 years. The 1619 is when the first, enslaved Africans arrived in Virginia and British North America. There was 100 years of transatlantic chattel slave trade that preceded that. Actually the first enslaved Africans in what is now the United States, I believe, were in St. Augustine in Florida when it was a Spanish territory, and then it extends all the way up. So telling the story of how we got here, how we got to a point where in 2020 people are still having to take to the streets to be heard, to be treated as full citizens, as full people, 55 years after the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act, 155 years after the Civil War, and we still have to have these same battles, shows that what we're doing is not working. Right. And we haven't had those conversations honestly and openly.
So Evan, you and I are both on the same page. I really, I feel that already. So it's not like we need to belabor the why of it so much as I think that what you and I should probably, because, we only want to spend probably half an hour having this conversation unless you want to have multiples, and I'd welcome that opportunity. But let's talk about how can we make a difference? What are some of the things we can do? I'm on the Board of Education in East Lyme. So we've already started to have some conversations with the Board of Ed and talking about how we're going to start to do some bias training with the Board of Ed ourselves. So if, as the leaders of the Board of Ed, then we can start to talk about how we can institute some of the changes so that everybody across the board can start to think differently and think more progressively in a more real manner, I guess. But what are some other things that we can do? I know you sent me a list of books, The Power of Story, Diverse Books for All Learners, and that's a Scholastic. Mm-hmm. And everybody's familiar with Scholastic. And so at different ages and stages, kids can, and adults too, can avail themselves of different authors that give different perspectives. And the list is phenomenal with all these books, and making sure that they're all available in our libraries, in our homes,
and on the curriculum. And they have to be taught. They have to be taught the same way that primers and everything are taught. It has to start young, because nobody comes out of the womb with these biases. They're learned, but they're learned at an early age. So it has to be a pre-K through 12th grade project. And I mean, and so that's going to take a lot of conversation, right? I mean, because there are people with different educational specialties. They have to be involved in the conversation. Certainly, we're talking right now, but we need people of color or people of, LGBTQ. I mean, I'm not personally, I'm not, but I know many people who are, and they tend to be invisible because of those biases and those, historical oppressions. So everybody has to be, who's a stakeholder in it, has to be involved in a holistic conversation about it. So what you're doing right now is exactly, the right first step. I'm curious, when you said we, are you talking about teachers or other board members, or who is the group that's approaching the board about these things in East Lyme?
Well, that's a great question, Evan, and thank you for asking. In our town of East Lyme, we have Black Lives Matter, East Lyme Black Lives Matter, and I think last I heard there were over 400 members of this Facebook group, and started by Ben Ostofsky, who is a PhD. Do you know him?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so he's a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon, and he's just has done phenomenal work, and his really his skill set is probably getting groups together and organizing and facilitating that. And then we have a whole bunch of really young, bright 20, 30-year-olds working on behalf of this. And a lot of them are alum. And so what we're trying to do with that is just rethink how we're doing what we're doing and making some steps in that regard. And I'm finding people very amenable to it. And it's really encouraging to hear people say they didn't know this, or they're happy to think about this and working towards it. And I think just making small inroads in that way, and I think that's going to have a big impact. But I can't speak for, I'm not the head of the board. I'm just a board member, so I can't speak on behalf of the board. I can only tell you my perspective, what I see is happening. But I'm really encouraged by the energy and the enthusiasm that's being shown. And looking at policies, some of our policies are older than some of the people that are on the East Lyme Black Lives Matter group. So looking at revision of some of those things, and looking to hire more people of color. And there's really good, like you said, there's good materials out there, but there's good exercises as well. One thing that I saw recently was on bias training, and just thinking, like, what do you think about when you think of a Black man? And so just reimagining all of that. So then what they do is they show, maybe you've seen this already, they show all these pictures of really great, handsome Black men that have done amazing things in our society. And, some of them are musicians, some of them are poets, some of them are politicians or statesmen. So it just makes you think, wow, maybe we're reimagining and retraining our brain, and down to the neuronic and synaptic level.
Yes, and that's what it takes, and that is exactly what it takes. As one of the goals of the coalition, in the in the model letter that we have going around, one of the very tangible things that we hope to see on curricula is, again, in addition to the anti-bias, anti-racism training, also having, Black studies, African-American studies be a requirement for graduation. I mean, to make sure that when kids are stepping away from the scholastic environment out into, if they are going on to higher education or wherever else they're going, we at least know that they have been exposed to these things, that they've had to think about them, that they've had to work on them and work to address them in a meaningful way. To an extent, that's, and then if changes in the curricula, changes in the mindset have done their job, then that's going to be a continuing process throughout their lives. They'll have the tools to look at the world around them, examine their own implicit biases, and if they're white and if they're people of color, know that they've been heard and that their backgrounds and who they are has been treated valuably and on as equal a footing as we can make it.
Right.
And so we need to train up adults who are going to create a better society than we have been involved in through again, not necessarily anybody's individual fault, but if you are not educated on these things, then all of those implicit and explicit cultural cues are going to creep in, and one day you find yourself having a twisted view of the world, and that's something that I think we can all agree we have to avoid at all costs with our kids.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think that you're pointing us in the right direction.
And
And,
thank you for your work. I mean, I'm just signing things and spreading the word. You're doing the actual work on the board. So thank you for
oh,
what you're doing.
well, thank you. Yeah, we're trying, and it has to be a collegial effort, and I think you have to take small steps because you want to pull people along and not cause anybody to feel as if they're being threatened, because it is a threatening place to start thinking about things in a different way,
Sure.
and to take away some of the power perhaps, and it's fear-based, right, that a lot of this is kind of centered on. That's
And
how I would.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, they say that, to those, I'm wildly paraphrasing, but the people who have always had power, equality looks like oppression. I mean, and that's, and that is something that's going to have to be combated because, these things are so prevalent and people have such a, obviously it's such a personal thing for everybody. I mean, that goes to the core of your identity and who you are in society. It's going to take some time for people who are used to used to having that privileged position in society without even really thinking about it, to step aside and start thinking critically about other people and their relation to them.
Well, I like how you inadvertently use the word inclusive, because I think that that's kind of what it's going to take. It's going to take people having the opportunity of saying together we're better, and my culture and your culture, if we take and mesh them, then that creates a better world for everybody, because it's a richer, more chance inclusive, richer, greater experience for everybody that we have. So
I mean,
yeah,
at the end of the day, everybody's a human being. I mean,
exactly.
the differences that are separating us, the differences that these structures are built on, I mean, the horrible things that have happened, the suffering is based on such utterly trivial differences when you get down to the human genome.
Hmm.
And it's going to take a recognition of that too, is that, I mean, it sounds like a kumbaya cliche thing, but it's a profound statement to know that, that when we get beyond perceiving each other's differences, then we can start to interact as people who are all equally human beings and all equally deserving of respect and inclusion again, and to be part of the fabric of society. And that's really just the core of this. It comes down to something that simple, and it's a shame that it's going to take that much work for us to get there, but we have to do the work.
Just one more quick question before I let you go. I'm just wondering, do you have any ideas for like next best steps? And like we've already talked a little bit about reading and curriculum, and to me, it seems like it almost needs to be project based. Just like
Absolutely.
being on the same crew team. I mean, back to boating again, but working together, like building a house, like Habitat, or gardening together, or painting a mural, something like that. What ideas do you have?
Sure. I mean, all of those sound good. I mean, if you can get people in it, I think that a major step has already been taken where, unfortunately, the senseless deaths of people, like Breonna Taylor, like George Floyd, have
List
woke
goes on
people,
and on, right, Eric?
and they're getting, and people are out on the street. I mean, I've been in marches in Old Saybrook and New London, in Waterford, everywhere but East Lyme, ironically, and I mean, it's really, you see people of all ages, all backgrounds. The diversity of messages is amazing, but they all center around what we need to do together. So I feel like that community spirit is already starting to happen organically. But yeah, I mean, finding ways to push that forward by having, as you said, project-based activities is a great idea. I would be remiss before we go if I didn't say, though, that the coalition has recommended certain first steps for the curriculum.
Okay.
understanding that this is going to take time and there is going to be some resistance. So the specific steps being laid out are putting anti-racist texts on mandatory summer reading lists, sent to parents and kids this summer, or over, winter break. Scheduling regular assemblies and workshops with guest speakers to address systems of oppression and injustice, put people in front of the kids who can speak to this in an engaging and, accessible manner. And then make allowances for students to embark on independent studies and also group independent studies that investigate subjects of race and discrimination and justice. And so these are things that don't require an immediate structural overhaul, but they can be folded into the existing curriculum, and it does get people working together, and it does get people talking, and it does get people, just addressing these issues in a hopefully constructive and collaborative way.
I agree. I think those are great first steps. I appreciate that. So I will take your ideas and share them with.
Not my ideas, but yes, the coalition.
Yeah. What the ideas that you just shared with me, and share those with other people so that we can start moving in this direction. I'm suggesting or thinking that you and I should meet again sometime like late October to see how things are progressing and to see if there's other next steps that you have that have come to your mind, and maybe in the meantime you and I could grab a coffee or go for a walk on the boardwalk.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I'll make one stipulation. I would love to, I will take you up on the coffee with social distancing in mind, of course. But when we meet again, there are many people in the coalition who are educators and are people of color, and I would love to speak with you again, but I feel like, I should be there as part of the conversation and not the only one having that conversation. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Great idea. So we could have more people from the coalition. I would welcome that opportunity. So thank you so much. Thank you for reaching out, and I really appreciate your efforts and energy.
Thank you, Cate. It was a pleasure.
Okay. Have a great day. Thanks.
You
Bye-bye.
too.